什么叫法治呢？就是法治。
By rule of law, we mean the law stands above power, holding sway and having the final say.
那么，这个最终是法说了算，这就是法治。
Why is rule of law so important in China today? Why has President Xi Jinping made rule of law one of the 4 comprehensives, his most important policies for transforming China? How does rule of law compare with rule of man or rule of power? What is socialist rule of law? What have been the historic problems with China's judicial system? And how significant are the recent reforms? What is the Supreme People's Court, and how does it work within China's judiciary? What's the relationship between rule of law and the leadership of the party, the CPC, the ruling party? Are there tensions or contradictions in enhancing rule of law in a political system with one ruling party? While foreigners often criticize China's lack of rule of law, the Chinese people have been even more concerned. That's why understanding China's judicial system, especially its recent reforms, brings us closer to China.
March 3, 2014. Chinese businessman Liu Han and 35 others were put on trial in a provincial court in Hubei province. Liu and his brother were accused of mafia-style crime and murder. Within 10 minutes of the trial's opening, the provincial court's social network began its real-time posts online. Starting from 2013, real-time coverage of important trials online has become a commonplace phenomenon in China. As of February 2015, more than 6 million verdicts have been disclosed online. China's leadership stressed judicial reforms in the 4th plenary session of the 18th CPC Central Committee in October 2014. The move is an important step in making judicial work transparent across the country.
按照我们的解释啊，全面依法治国和全面深化改革是这个4个全面当中的这个如了之两益啊，策之两能。
Hu Yinten is president of the Second Circuit Court of the Supreme People's Court. He also serves as director of the Supreme People's Court Policy Research Office.
全面依法治国，那就是什么呢？就是把法治作为我们国家的这个基本方略，作为呢中国共产党执政的基本方式，要涉及用法治来治理、治党、治国、治军，那么来这个管理内政、外交、国防，也就是说，我们党和国家、经济社会、法治、司法的各个方面，都要用法治来统领，都要用法治来规范，都要用法治来推动。
As a distinguished legal scholar, how would you analyze the past problems that have existed in the judicial system and rule of law that has required this new approach to rule of law?
那么现在中国呢，法治建设当中的问题啊，实际上也是很多的。如果没有那么多问题啊，就不会有那么多改革举措了。我感觉主要的问题可能啊，一个呢就是我们毕竟啊，这个法治建设的时间还是比较短的。我们看西方国家，法治是一个很长的历史过程，它实际上也需要有个用法治来统一思想，那么能够把历史上的法治传统发扬光大这么一个过程。那么我们国家这个方面呢就比较匮乏，所以传统的一些人治思想、权大于 这个法的这个思想，还有呢，老百姓心中无法，心中他不信仰法律，啊，这个方面呢还是比较突出，这是一个方面，就是这个历史传统，我觉得太短了，啊。第二个呢，就是我们的立法，我们立法现在中国特色社会主义法律体系已经形成了，但是呢，这些立法当中有一些还是脱离我们的实际的，在执法方面，现在最大的问题就是有法不依，执法不严。
Given China's vast territory and large population, implementing rule of law has never been an easy task. In 221 BC, the state of Qin founded China's first imperial dynasty. One of the reasons for its success was the adoption of far-reaching penal and administrative codes. The codes exacted severe punishments for failure to comply with duties imposed by the state, and on the whole punished all lawbreakers alike. In 202 BC, Han Dynasty succeeded Qing. Administrative codes and severe punishments were replaced by a hierarchy of ministers and officials, all ultimately responsible to the emperor. Today, there are still traces of that hierarchy in both Chinese society and families. The traditional vision of social life in China attaches great importance to family and community value. Thus, people tend to turn to family or community leaders to settle disputes. On the other hand, bringing dispute to the court implies distrust over family and community leaders, and as a result, it brings shame to the family and community as a whole.
Well, China, if we go back to the old history, and it was a kind of feudal society and agriculture society for thousands of years, which is remarkable.
Wang Chengguang is professor in the School of Law at Tsinghua University. He's also the vice president of Legal Theory Association of China Law Society.
Therefore, the system of the feudal society has deeply rooted into the society. And even during the nationalist government, and the rule of law was not really accepted and established in the society.
This is also true even after the founding of the People's Republic of China.
And the Communist Party started with the Revolutionary War, trying to overthrow the old regime, and also during the Second World War, were engaging in the anti-Japanese invasion. So the Communist Party and also the army led by the Communist Party are actually a revolutionary party. So what is the meaning of revolutionary? Revolutionary means they don't respect the law. If they follow the law, they're not actually making revolution, at most the reform.
Right.
So this is the kind of mentality of revolutionary party.
To this day, there are still traces of that disrespect. And most prominent of all is the tension between rule of man and rule of law.
什么叫人治呢？人治就是权大于法，这就是人治。什么叫法治呢？就是法治，就是法大于权力，法律是至上的，啊，那么这个最终是法说了算，这就是法治，啊，如果呢，这个最终要请示领导，由领导拍板来决定，那这就是人治，啊，实际上这是长期以来我们几千年的历史啊，就是这样的。这个传统。
One of the challenges, one of the debates in China today is how do you reconcile rule of law with the leadership or rule of the party? These two very basic concepts are, in many circles in the West, thought to be contradictory. So how do you harmonize rule of law on the one hand and rule of the party leadership on the other?
我觉得这种观点呢是可以理解的，因为什么呢？从西方国家来看，几百年的这个法治建设的历史啊， 确实它是和多党制和西方国家的民主，这个是多党制是在一起的，是结合在一起的。所以在这个政治条件下，它建成了西方式的法治国家。它就从来没有一个，那么是在一党制下建成了法治国家的。所以它没有这个客观条件，它就不会有这种认识。所以我对西方学者有这种理解，有这种观点是很理解的，因为这个没有实践嘛。但是我想呢，要说一下呢，我们建设的是中国特色社会主义法治国家，我们不是建设的这个西方那样的法治国家。将来。
Going forward, the judges and prosecutors of courts and procuratorate at the provincial, municipal, and grassroots levels will be appointed at the Provincial People's Congress. The purpose is to rule out intervention from other parties.
Culture Express. See the world in color.
As early as the 1980s, China started reforming court trials and enhancing professionalism in the judiciary. In 2004, China launched large-scale judicial reforms for the purpose of establishing a judicial system with clearly defined powers and responsibilities, collaboration and restraint, and efficient operations. Since reform and opening up policies were introduced in 1978, more and more people are settling their disputes in court.
You've been discussing the rule of law at the macro-national level. Let's talk about it at the local level, where the rule of man, of individuals, of party leaders at low levels have in many cases completely overrode any sort of rule of law by interventions on a fairly regular basis, being almost the rule, not the exception, about how things worked in the legal system at local levels. How serious was and is the problem, and how is it being addressed?
I think this is a really very insightful analysis. And the rule of law we have discussed as a national program, national agenda, and requires establishment of the entire system and regime. But if we look at China, China is such a huge country and huge population. And even the central policy by the leading party, by the central government, has been officially changed and shifted to the rule of law as a national program. But at various local levels, we do not expect the overnight change. You can't expect overnight change, particularly to establish the institutions and to set up the organs or enforcement forces relatively easy. But if you really want to change the people's mentality, as what I described, revolutionary party's mentality to ruling party, ruling government mentality, really requires much more time.
I'd like to understand that mentality. Let's understand the depth of the problem. Yeah. So take me to a local level where you have local party officials who are running the area. What has been the mentality that they have vis-a-vis the law? How do they think about it? What do they actually do, or have they done, that is the root cause of the problem?
Well, the local interest and also their habitual way of governance. So in their mentality, back to the mentality, they think we are in the position, we have the power, you must do this. Disregard the legal procedure, legal requirement. I tell you a funny story. I was in a remote place, rural area in China. We had a summer program to providing some law courses to local citizens, local peasants in rural. So village heads, village accountants, etc. So it's a large training program during the summer vacation. And the governor and the party secretary of the county organized this training. So we thought, well, this government is really good and emphasizing on rule of law, promoting the legal knowledge of all these, among all these villagers. That's good. But in the evening when we had dinner together and the restaurant owner came to the governor and party secretary saying that the restaurant is just beside the highway. And all the cars passing by cannot stop. It's highway. So I open the highway, make an exit to my restaurant. I paved a small road, very good business. But heavy patrol, the police came and stopped it and blocked it again and gave me a fine. And my business is suffering. And the governor says, okay, just reopen it. I was really amazed. But I think the governor actually is out of good heart and trying to help the local, let's say, the restaurant owner, local people. But clearly against the law.
To repair the damage that rule of man has done to the importance of law, the latest round of judicial reform has transferred control of the judiciary, the court system, from local level to provincial level, including the selection of judges, thereby removing the capacity of local governments to promote judges friendly to their personal interests.
I have said in my speeches and communication in the West that perhaps one of the most important reforms of any kind that China has made has been taking the reporting of the courts away from the local government and putting it at a higher level. I'd like to get your comments on the importance of that, which I think is underappreciated internationally.
推动省下法院、检察院人财物统一管理，实际上就是这项改革。这项改革有人把它概括为一句话，叫什么话呢？就是去地方化。什么叫去地方化呢？就是因为原来的这些基层法院和中级法院都是它的两级人大这个产生的，人员也是法院的这个工作，包括法官和法院其他工作人员都是这些地方管的，财政就是法院的经费也是由地方两级财政保障的。然后这个盖楼，需要盖楼这个经费也得靠地方出，所以法院呢，往往在办案的方面就会受这些影响，那么就影响法院这个独立行使职权，影响检察院、法院独立行使职权，所以很多人批评。那么现在是什么意思呢？现在这项改革是什么呢？就是说，将来，这3级法院、检察院的法官、检察官的任命，将来逐步要收到省一级，这是一个。另外呢，这个经费呢，由这个省里面的财政统一保障，就是省里面拿经费来统一保障，那么这样的目的是什么呢？就是排除干扰。
While rule of law is prevailing over the power of man, it must set up institutionalized systems to prevent the power of man from reasserting itself in subtle ways.
A major feature of China's reform today is a very serious anti-corruption campaign. What's the relationship between the anti-corruption campaign that's carried on at the highest levels in government and rule of law and the judiciary system in a practical sense? How can the judiciary facilitate the anti-corruption vision, particularly of President Xi?
在审理好腐败案件，帮助国家治理腐败的同时，我们要抓好法院内部的廉政建设，要反对法官腐败，不允许法官利用这个权利来谋利，所以我们周强院长对这个问题非常重视，发现一个查处一个，所以我一个主张，我也有一句话叫 对司法腐败应当零容忍，对错案你不能零容忍，因为谁当法官都可能出错，你不能零容忍，零容忍就没有人当法官了，是吧？这个足球裁判、现场裁判他都可能错误，法官裁判有可能发现错案，但是我们要纠正。但是对司法腐败，我们发现一起要查处一起。
How can you enforce that? That's really important. How can you develop a system in which you can ensure that judges are not corrupt? What are the specific things you can implement?
哎呀，这个方面的其实这个方面的规定啊，这个方面的这个纪律，这个方面要求是很多的。你比如说，我们原来有一个5个严禁啊，比如说就是作为法官。严禁私下接触当事人，我们曾经发生过一个法官私下和那么律师和当事人喝茶，最后把这个事曝光到网上，最后这个法官就离职了，就离职了。那么我想要真正解决这个问题，可能要多管齐下。首先，把好入口。是吧？你要这个有些人呢，说是他本来就不能够当国家公职人员，或者就不能够当法官。他一当了以后，他肯定就要去，这个人他就有追求这个财富的这种愿望。像这种人，你就不能让他进来。第二个要教育，首先要经常教育，天天讲，真正经常讲。第三个还是当然最可靠的，还是要用科学的管理。用司法公开呀，用公正而透明的程序裁判文书上网等等，就是让司法腐败无处藏身，当然最重要的还要加大惩罚力度，就是零容忍，一发现了那就要惩罚。
The most important thing for judicial guarantee of human rights is ensuring the right of appeal. Then still important in the right of appeal is the right for the parties and defense lawyers to finish their statements.
From emerging powers to expanding partnerships, from fighting poverty to combating climate change, booming economies, war-ravaged nations, and everything in between. We capture the changes affecting the most dynamic and diverse continent on the planet, taking you beyond the headlines to the people and their stories. Asia Today, delivering Asia to the world.
Is the Western perception of lawyers being restricted in their ability to defend clients a legitimate concern?
为什么会出现这种现象？那么是不是这种现象很普遍？那么我可以客观的说一下。第一个，就是我们国家随着特别是2012年修改刑诉法以后律师的地位、律师的辩护权都得到了很大的改善，于是律师他可以在侦查阶段就可以介入了，只要公安机关讯问这个犯罪嫌疑人的时候，把拘押犯罪嫌疑人，他就可以以辩护人的身份，过去他不是辩护人的身份，所以从法律上来讲，我们的保障，我觉得已经相当到位了。就总体上看，但是从在具体的案件当中，特别是各个地方来看，一些个案来看，确实有不到位的地方，不到位，有一些是执法理念的问题，有些可能是有干扰的问题，但总体上应该是立法是比较到位的，大部分案件当中就是很好的，但是也有一些案件存在一些问题。这些问题，我感觉到什么呢？从我们法院来讲那么他就是没有让律师充分的依法行使辩护权利，就在有些案件当中，就像所以我现在在巡回法庭，我结合我的体会谈一谈。 我现在就觉得，人权的司法保障最重要是什么？从我们司法来讲，你就要保障他的诉权嘛。那么诉权当中最重要的是什么呢？就是要让当事人说完话的权利，要让辩护律师充分说话的权利。所以我在我的巡回法庭就推行了一个制度，现在非常好，就是我叫坚持最后一问。比如说你今天采访我，采访完了，我还要问你一句，还有什么问题吗？所以在诉讼进行的每一个阶段，我都要求法官要问你还有什么问题吗？知道说没有了，那我再进行下个阶段。所以现在没有一个律师对我这个第二巡回法庭有意见。
If you look ahead 10 years or 20 years in terms of the continuing progress and reform of the rule of law in general, but the judicial system, the Supreme Court in specific, what would give you the greatest satisfaction, specifically to look back at the end of your career, having been one of the most senior leaders of the judicial system in China? What would give you a feeling of accomplishment during this next period of 10 or 20 years?
就第一个100年是中国共产党成立100年的时候，那就是1921年，就2021年是吧？100年，这个时候呢，全面这个小康社会啊是建成了，因为按照这个目标是小康社会建成了，小康社会建成了有3个关于法治的指标。第一个指标是什么呢？就是依法治国的基本方略基本落实，法治政府建设这个基本完成，也就是法治政府基本建成，初步建成吧。那然后呢，司法公信力不断提高，那就司法比现在有公信了，有权威了。这是第一个100年，就是2021年。第二个呢，讲30年以后呢，就相当于什么？中华人民共和国成立100周年，那就是2049年。什么是最激动人心的？它就是总体上讲，老百姓来讲，法在心中了，就是法走进了人们的心中，法成为我们一个很重要的信仰。那么真正的宪法就是至上，司法机关有特别这个的权威，大家呢这个都会按照法律来办事。
China's commitment to strengthening rule of law is exemplified by recent reforms. When international media question me about the state of reform in China, often expressing their doubts, the first piece of evidence I submit is China's decision to sever local government's control of the courts, thus reducing dramatically interference from local party or government officials in the judicial process, and the establishment of circuit courts of the Supreme People's Court, which brings justice closer to ordinary people. Moreover, there are now strict rules against officials meddling in legal activities, and severe penalties if they violate them. Similarly, there are now new rules for legal proceedings that protect the rights of the accused and uphold legal integrity, including improving the quality of judges and holding them accountable lifelong for any miscarriages of justice. Follow judicial reform to keep closer to China.